Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. James Lyons-Weiler. I'm coming to you from the WWDNYK studios in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. As people know, I have been focused very extensively with deep dives into understanding the coronavirus. And the question on everyone's mind is, how bad can this get? Well, ironically, about 2 weeks ago, I did simulations to find out how bad it could get. And what I want to do this evening is this evening of 3/8/2020 is I'd like to explain a few concepts that are very important to understanding about whether or not we should prepare for mass quarantine. And so I might be hopping off to the internet to pull up some videos or pictures. We'll see, but I have some slides here that I'd like to share with you. And let's start here with the question of some of the issues. Some of the issues that I see coming at me, because people are sending me questions, and I love to get contacted by anybody, and lots of questions about science. I'll try to answer them if I can. If I can't, I'll give you hopefully some references to articles, scientific articles, or blog articles that cite scientific articles. But the number one question I think that are on people's minds that they're waking up to is, how do we know what to believe when it comes to rates, like death rates? How do we know that this isn't just a conspiracy? How do we know that this isn't an attempt to stall the election or designed to take our eyes off of Julian Assange? And, there's a cavalier attitude that I'm going to caution against here that is understandable. We have been lied to repeatedly since for a long time by our government. But I'm going to say the big lies really started in the 1980s. Vaccines and autism, the big lies about Zika and microcephaly, and the big lies about, that that has no mutations. Tom Frieden famously or infamously said that, and I cited his unbelievably scientifically inaccurate quote that turned out to be misleading so that CDC could create or market their Ebola rapid assay development kit, which was a PCR kit. We're going to talk about the PCR tests. We're going to talk about what went wrong with them and whether they matter anymore. We're going to talk about vaccines. We're going to talk about the coronavirus vaccine. We're going to talk about IPAC research, and we're going to answer questions. The cavalier attitude is, should you be cavalier and say, well, I'm not worried. I'm the 80%. I'm probably going to be just fine. I want to share this with the community, the WWDNYK community, the IPAC community, Unbreaking Science community. I want to share these things. And I have some very, very harsh words for Dr. Peter Hotez in particular, as well as another MD whose name is not worth mentioning, but who has said some pretty stupid things that are not helpful. So let's go. Review the questions. I'm going to get into the death rate estimation. I'm going to talk about serious and critical illness rates, and I'm going to look at some comparisons among countries using material that's out there on the web that I think is reflects accurate numbers as accurate as they can be. I'm going to discuss why the U.S. has failed in their response, and that includes the release of infected patients. Okay. After giving them a flawed test. The CDC's test was flawed. I'm going to talk about how the U.S. failed by putting the economy first instead of doing social isolation and encouraging social isolation a week and a half ago last week. And I'm going to talk about why self-isolation will always fail. And I'm going to predict that mass quarantine in Washington state is imminent. And Dr. Fauci today made a quote on television that I'm going to talk about that I disagree with, and I think the immediate future is going to show him wrong. I'm going to revisit the IPAC prediction models that I did last week or so, week and a half or whatever it was, and see if those predictions still hold up. And I'm going to talk about the research that I'm doing right now that is showing that coronaviruses will endanger millions, and what we all need to do about that. So the initial death rate estimates in China, they looked at 2.2 to 3%. and they seemed really, really high. And then a lot of people said, well, China really doesn't know what they're doing. There's a lot more cases out there. There's probably, for every one case that's presented, there's 5 cases out there that's not presenting because it's so mild, or 3 cases. So we really don't know the death rates. Listen, the death rate from the flu is what, 0.05% or something like that. It's really small. Okay, that's the death rate in the United States. 2 to 3% mortality case. Fatality rate, as it's called. And part of this is the public's innumeracy, that is, inability to understand math. Thank you, Common Core. Thank you, Bill Gates. When we talk about 2 to 3% fatality, it doesn't mean 2 to 3% of the entire population is going to die. What it means is 2 to 3% of, if it's a good case fatality rate estimate, it means that 2 to 3% of the infected people who have a diagnosis will die. And so when we look at China, initially it was 2 to maybe 3%, and then they said it was maybe higher, and then now they're saying that it might be lower. Well, guess what? It stabilized at about 2 to 3%. That tells us that the clinical symptoms of this, if you have coronavirus infection, you're probably going to know it. The actual clinical diagnosis is a differential diagnosis. It's unique enough. The flu doesn't really have a dry cough. People with coronavirus who get seriously ill very rapidly. That doesn't really happen with the flu. It's not characteristic of it anyway. But outside of Wuhan province, we see maybe less than 2%, and there's this evolution of a new strain that the Chinese are pointing to. They call they differentiate between the S strain and the L strain, and I'm not going to get into the big difference there, but one of the strains actually appears to perhaps have lower mortality, which is either true or it's not true. Why might it be true? Well, because that's exactly what we expect with a virus that comes into the human population, or a human virus that goes into, say, the pig population, or if it jumps species, if a bat virus comes over, it should evolve to be less pathogenic because the people who die take the more pathogenic strains with them. So there is a huge amount of variation, billions and billions of replications with billions of mutations have occurred in China, I'm sure. Within each patient, taking all the viral replications. Iran apparently has a high mortality rate, and we're going to look at some numbers here in a bit. But nobody can really get a grip on the reality of what's really happening in Iran, what's reliable. In Italy, there were 1,200 new cases today. Reported it would be yesterday, today for them, but yesterday for us. 5,883. I mean, today for us, yesterday for them, it would be. There were 233 deaths. That's making total. That makes it a 3.96%. Now, people are saying, well, listen, these numbers are hyped because we don't know how many real cases we have. What about testing? And to the extent that I can say, yes, that's correct, I can also say that the death rate in countries that are doing testing is holding at reasonably high levels that don't put these estimates too far off. Since the day one, when CDC first confirmed a case of coronavirus in the United States, it had already been some period of time before coronavirus came to the United States. There were probably thousands of cases that were around, and so it makes sense to say, well, wait a minute, the people that are presenting, they really, we're getting a fatality rate from what we should call severe case fatality rate, and to some extent I can agree with that. However, if we look at the data, and these are the most recent data, China has managed to bring down the rate of new cases significantly lower, much lower, the rate of new cases than they had been historically, and so they're actually turning the curve at least potentially flat. They're flattening out the curve. But they have 28 new deaths. They still have 20,000 active cases. Now, how did China do that? China didn't do that by everybody washing their hands China didn't do that with a vaccine. China didn't do that with everybody cleaning off their keypads and everything like that exclusively. China did draconian measures where they locked down the populations in the large cities, so much so that you could actually see a difference in the amount of air pollution from space. Um, and so these are the statistics, and I'm not going to go over every country here, but these deaths that are occurring, these new death rates, I want to stay focused on that for a minute. Um, there's a good amount of variation from country to country in terms of the new case rate and the new death rate, and those are things we're going to look at. Most of the deaths are occurring. This is from Carl Wickland at Coffee Trading, and some of you will recognize it from a video that I shared from Peak Prosperity, and he's doing a very good job. Peak Prosperity is doing a very good job tracking this. But these are just age distributions by country, and there's some variation from country to country in terms of how many old people they have. And if you look at China, there's not from these data, I'm not referencing these data, but there is a near linear relationship between the risk of death and age. So the older you are, the higher the risk of you have of dying from this. And so most of the 2 to 3% case fatality rate or severe case fatality rate that they're seeing is in the elderly, but certainly not all of it. And these age distribution diagrams, here we have a high risk, moderate risk, and low risk, country by country, to see where, if the elderly are at highest risk, we might understand some of the reasons why the death rate in Italy is so high. So I want to thank Carl Wickland from that, as well as Peak Prosperity. But if we look at who's at most risk, again using Chinese data, this comes from an article from The Scientist. The case fatality rate here, again, this got to pay attention to what I'm actually expressing here. These are people who have cardiovascular disease and who are infected. They have a 10.5% risk of death. Okay, so this is the number of deaths per infection, the case fatality rate. So this is a very, very high case fatality rate. So people in the United States who are elderly and have cardiovascular disease, 1 out of 10 of them will die if they're infected. Do you know anybody with cardiovascular disease? That person has a 1 in 10 chance of death if they get infected. Diabetes, 7.3% rate. Do you know anybody with diabetes? Everybody in the United States, apparently 50% of Americans have diabetes. Okay. And chronic respiratory disease, hypertension, or cancer, about a 6%. That's using Chinese data from real deaths. Okay. But here's Dr. Li Wenliang. He's the whistleblower who came out and within China and tried to tell his colleagues there's a problem here, and he persisted. And people will say, well, no, see, there you go, Jack, you're not really paying attention. They killed him to silence him because they couldn't make a hero, and it makes the state look bad. No, he had coronavirus infection. He said he had coronavirus infection, and what happened to him, I think, most likely is that he got a second infection, and that secondary infection plays into a lot of what we're going to talk about today, that the virus and a vaccine for the virus appears to prime you for serious health outcome, even if you're healthy. So he looks to me maybe he's in his 40s, late 30s, and he's gone. So it doesn't just kill older people. Now, out in Washington, Evergreen Health. Let's talk about the testing of this. So, about a week and a half ago, the people on the Princess cruise ship, or 2 weeks ago, people on the Princess cruise ship were let go. Some people were let go after they tested negative for the virus, only to find out later they actually had the virus. They had the infection. And the reason is that CDC's test was flawed. They're putting out a narrative now that says that the reason why their test was flawed is because they were trying to test for other viruses. But I looked at and analyzed their test. I got a hold of their primer probe sets, and their primers actually for 4 I think it was 4 out of the primer probe sets. These are parts of the test that actually grab chunks of DNA from a sample and will amplify. Sorry, there's specific to a gene, and they will amplify that part of the gene, and make millions of copies so you can detect what you have. Well, there were 12 primer probe sets, and 4 of them seemed like they could amplify human genes very easily. In my analysis of them, given my expertise in molecular biology, and that's a problem, because if you have competing resources for the other reagents in the polymerase chain reaction, and you're over amplifying the human reaction, then you can get a false negative. And so they were using 2 out of 3 sets or something like that as evidence of a positive. So if one of your sets is not working, you have a very inaccurate test there. And in this setting, the false negative is a greater risk than the false positive. False positive, the worst that happens is that individual gets quarantined. A false negative, that person goes to a business meeting and can affect 150 people. So this Evergreen Health also, if you look at the words here, the CDC apparently has declared the SARS-CoV-2 endemic to the American population. That this is remarkable. This is incredible that the terminology actually says this here. How do they know that? How do they know that we're not going to turn this around? This tells me that they're actually going to allow this to persist and spread throughout the population, and that they don't have a plan. I'm not trying to induce panic, but I'm telling you that they're trying to sell their test kit. And I know this full well. It's a cash cow for them right now. If everybody needs to test, and perpetual testing for coronavirus would be a dream come true. The CDC insisted that they use their kit, okay? This is a great article you should read. Don't test, don't tell. Again, this I got this from Peak Prosperity. But don't test, don't tell. The bureaucratic bungling of the COVID-19 tests. Okay, and the language in here is remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. Go read that article, because he basically says, if you mess this up, you're going to be in a situation where you're going to have a serious problem, a very serious problem. And I highly recommend this article. So this is my plotting of the number of COVID cases in the United States since day one, using readily available data from the World Health Organization. And I'm surprised, frankly, that we reached the hockey stick this soon. If we go back over the simulations that I did a couple weeks ago, a week and a half ago, I made it really clear that, I assumed that we really didn't start doing anything about it till day 18, and then it took off. Go back and look at it. This is one of the articles that references the video. I might be able to bring the video up itself, but that would be too self-referential even for my tastes. So there's a video on YouTube that you can go to, and you can watch that simulation. And the main point of that simulation was to show that if we do nothing, it's going to hit the hockey stick pretty quick. And that's basically what we're looking at. Do nothing, we hit the hockey stick pretty quick. Okay, the hockey stick curve in the takeoff. This is the exponential part of the curve, which is not infinitely exponential. Of course, it has to hit a peak, and it hits the peak after people who are infected start running into people who are infected, and then we get like a logistic or a sigmoidal curve, and it tends to flatten out till everybody's infected. But the two things that I said in those simulations that I tested in simulation were, number one, what happens if we do self-isolation? That is voluntary. If you can work from home, stay home. If you put yourself in your house all by yourself and your family, after maybe, a week of prepping, you're doing a good service because you're actually slowing down the rate of spread. And I tried to get this word out 2 weeks ago. I tried very hard to get this word out a week and a half ago. And some people heard me, and some people went out and went grocery shopping and got dry goods and pet food and things that you need for a 2 week period with the intention that they would go back out again in 2 weeks' time. And most people, of course, didn't get the message because I'm just IPAC. CDC, instead of screwing around with their tests, should have been telling people to self-isolate if they can. They should have been telling employers, tell your employees to work from home if they can. But this is why I made the post today, and I'm not scaring people by saying it's too late. This is a doubling, right? So we're at say 350, and this is a daily. This is pretty soon going to become a daily doubling, where at the inflection point, excuse me, we're going to see a doubling every day until something is done to bring this to an end and to change the curve down. And in the United States, 750 cases, these are recognized cases. Well, there's already 1,500 cases that are out there just waiting to become serious enough where people have symptoms. Okay. And if we're at 750 cases right now, it might not seem a lot in the huge population, and that's what people say. But part of the innumeracy of the public, I think, is that they don't understand the power of the exponential. So obviously 750 will become 1,500, and then so we're at 350 right now. So 700 will become 1,400, right? And 1,400 will become 2,800, and it goes off from there. Just take your calculator, and you can do the math, and you can estimate for yourself how many days if we do nothing, right? And so, what I want to impress upon people is how important it is that they don't just assume that there's nothing going on here. 700 becomes 1,400, and then 2,800, and then 5,600. And then 11,200, and then 22,400. That's in one, and then a week later, we're at 22,400. And then a week after that, we're at about 1.4 million. Okay, and then a week after that, you know how that's going to go. So if you're doubling every day, it just goes off the roof. So. Okay, so you say, well, what are you worried about, Jack? There's 80% of the people are going to have mild illness. Okay, fine. So that means 20% of the people, 14% of the people actually are going to have serious illness, critical illness, and 6% are going to need the ICU. Well, if we look at different countries that have taken tactics like Hong Kong and Singapore, these cities have taken social isolation very seriously. This is what they're doing differently. And they've slowed it down. They haven't stopped it, but they've slowed it down. So it's a linear increase instead of a exponential increase. And by slowing it down, okay, we have like 970,000 beds, hospital beds in the United States. Okay, I just told you that in a couple of weeks' time we'll be at 1 million sick people. These are, and I'll go back to the fact that, okay, well, these are diagnosed people who have severe cases. That's why we know about them. They're presenting, and they don't just have a mild cough. Fine. So wait another week. Next week it's going to be in 100,000, right? About 100,000. A week after that, it'll be approaching 1 million. A week after that, game over. All the hospital beds will be filled up. So we absolutely need to stop going out now if you can afford it. If you can work from home, insist that you're going to work from home. Okay, now's the time to do it, to slow the rate of spread. You don't want to be a vector. And the CDC should be saying this, not me. This is why I'm convinced that that it's game over. It's all but game over right now in the United States. This is the history of the percent increase on this curve right here. On this curve right here, I calculated day to day the percent increase from the last day. And what we want to see is, do we just have episodes of clusters? Okay. So here we have the initial outbreak, obviously, it's an infinite more, it's 5 cases, right? And so we have an increase, and then it goes away, and then it's stable for a while. And then we have a cluster, and then it goes away. These flat periods, well, we're not testing, so we don't know. But then we have a cluster, and then it apparently goes away. No more increase for a day or two. And then it comes back, and now we're seeing a sustained increase, day to day, a percent increase from the day before. This right here, the sustained increase, even though it's only 4 data points, 4 or 5, let's see, 32, 30, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. So it's about a week and a day, I think. So this has been sustained for a week and a day. This is a percent increase on a percent increase on a percent increase. So that's compounding. That's why it's gone exponential. This is why I'm convinced that it's game over unless, like right now, the government says, okay, we're going to do mass quarantine, but we'll get to that. So this is from that article I told you to go read earlier. So the slides are out of place. Sorry. I just want to read it to you. Now that doesn't mean that you can't screw up the coronavirus test if you really set your mind to it. And in fact, that's exactly what the CDC did in January when they rejected the World Health Organization's proposed test panel for SARS-CoV-2. They already had a test. They wanted their own. There it is, folks. The CDC wanted to cash in on testing, okay, in favor of a gold-plated test panel, the CDC's own design. That's disgusting. After all, why just test for SARS-CoV-2 when you could also test for other SARS and MERS viruses? Irrelevant. Irrelevant, irrelevant, irrelevant. Unfortunately, with complexity came error, and these CDC triple test kits had flaw in one of the multiple tests, ruining the entire test. One of the multiple tests. I wonder which one it was. SARS-CoV-2. Thank you, Dr. Lyons-Weiler, for your email showing us that our test was screwed up. All right. I did. I had emailed them last week. As soon as I got the probe or prime set, the prime sets, the probe primer set, sorry. By the way, they delayed that for a number of days. I think it was 4 days after I requested it. They refused to send it out. Now the CDC is producing a solo test for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, but this fiasco set us back weeks. Those were critical weeks, folks. That was the time when they should have been saying, oh, thank you, World Health Organization, got that test. Now, everybody, we need to self-isolate if you can. And there's another thing that I did with the simulations 2 weeks ago, is I also modeled the effect of self-isolation and treatments. And it's only through a combination of self-isolation, quarantine, and treatment. If you quarantine 60% of the population and you treat 40% of the population, this will come to an end in the United States. If you don't, it just becomes a very high frequency infection that sticks around for a long time, a long, long, long time. So let's talk about Dr. Peter Hotez's idiotic claim. All right. I'm going to play the video. Sorry. The video here, he tried to blame the spread of the outbreak on the anti-vaxxers by claiming there was not enough funding for the SARS vaccine due to anti-vaxxers because of our quote-unquote protests. Well, not ours because I'm not anti-vaxxer. But now Dr. Hotez knows there can be no safe spike-based SARS vaccine because earlier in his testimony to Congress, he said that was the reason why. And he knows that the reason why the vaccine failed was due to unacceptably high levels of mortality in animal safety studies in SARS. And by the way, SARS is not SARS-CoV-2, so we don't have a vaccine for SARS-CoV-2 because it's a novel virus. But nevertheless, I'm claiming that Hotez lied to the House committee he was testifying to, and I have to add this video. Let's see if I'm going to find it. Bear with me, folks. If he had only told the truth and not taken the opportunity to make a slam against anti-vaxxers. Of course, they're going to try to blame the anti-vaxxers for anything and everything. Bad weather, they're going to blame the anti-vaxxers. So this snippet of the video was taken off of Newsfeed by Eileen Iorio, so I have to give her credit and thanks. Now watch this. Let's watch Peter Hotez lie.
We partnered with a group at the New York Blood Center and the Galveston National Laboratory to take on the big scientific challenge of coronavirus vaccines. And I say a scientific challenge because one of the things that we're not hearing a lot about is the unique potential safety problem of coronavirus vaccines. Because what happens with certain types of respiratory virus vaccines, you get immunized, and then when you get actually exposed to the virus, you get this kind of paradoxical immune enhancement phenomenon. And we don't entirely understand the basis of it. And unfortunately, some of my colleagues in the biotech industry are making these inflated claims. You know, you've seen this on the newspapers. We're going to have this vaccine in weeks, or in this and that. What they're really saying is they can move a vaccine into clinical trials. But at the Center for Biologics Evaluation Research, they're aware of the problem, but it's not going to go quickly. We're going to have to follow this very slowly, cautiously, to make certain we're not seeing that immune enhancement. So, you know, now we're hearing projections a year, 18 months, who knows?
Now, that was not the video that I thought.
What's the best the American people can hope for in
This
terms
is it,
of a
right here.
quick vaccine or a soon vaccine or?
Well, I think it's really important to remember that vaccines are not quick. And that has a lot to do with vaccine confidence in the United States, because, as you know, we have a very aggressive anti-vaccine movement here in this country. And
there you go. So
measles came back in 2019 because of the anti-vaccine movement. Historically, when we've had measles epidemics, it peaks now, late winter, early spring. So we may be battling two epidemics. We have to reassure the public that we don't give out vaccines unless they're thoroughly tested, and they are the most thoroughly tested pharmaceuticals we have for safety.
So yield back. I just want to thank Dr. Hotez, too, for leading the fight against the anti-vaxxers, that misinformation.
Thank you, Mr. Breyer.
okay, so taking a good close look at what Hotez just said. The first thing that he said was, he said that immune enhancement by the coronavirus spike protein is what he's talking about. There are three studies that showed that the SARS vaccine was unsafe. That animals who were vaccinated here, have a slide on that. Animals who were vaccinated, mice and ferrets, against the SARS vaccine, and mice that were vaccinated against the MERS virus actually had unacceptably high mortality rates once they were challenged with the SARS virus again. So it's not anti-vaxxers that killed the SARS vaccine program. It was dead mice and ferrets that killed the vaccine program for SARS. And he knows this because he just said it. Second, when he pulls in the anti-vaxxers as being responsible for this somehow, here's what I hear. What I hear is the anti-vaxxers and the vaccine risk aware are holding science, are holding pharmaceutical manufacturers, and holding the CDC, like you, vaccine manufacturers and vaccine makers like you, Peter Hotez, to an appropriate level of safety standard. That's what I hear. So it's a good thing that we have vaccine risk-aware Americans, and it's a damn good thing that we have anti-vaxxers around to hold you to the standard that's necessary to make sure the vaccines have a chance of safety testing. Now, the lie is that anti-vaxxers, the first lie is that anti-vaxxers had something to do with it. The second lie that Dr. Peter Hotez said was that vaccines are the most robustly safety pharmaceutical product that we have. So, having said that, then we know that that's not true. We absolutely know that the vaccine safety science is based on observational science. Vaccine safety science, post-market surveillance, is based on observational correlation studies that are not capable of testing causality. We know this. He knows this. He's misleading the public. He's misleading the press. He's misleading this committee on Congress by making this outrageously false claim that observational data are superior to randomized saline placebo-controlled clinical trials. Like drugs are held to a higher standard than vaccines by far. Now they came up with this term pharmacovigilance, where they're saying, okay, we'll put it out in the market, we'll try it on 100 million, 200 million unwitting American citizens without giving them informed consent for being in a clinical trial, and then we'll use these passive systems like the vaccine adverse events reporting system and these secretive systems like the vaccine safety database data link, and we'll base our long-term safety assessment of vaccines on that instead of randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials. Del Bigtree and I Can Decide, the network, and their team there at ICanDecide.org have done a fantastic job at laying out the differences between, I'm very proud to know them, they've done a saint's work to lay out the differences between the placebo-controlled randomized prospective clinical trial. It's supposed to be double-blinded, right? And this crap science that they're basing vaccine safety science on. Okay, and they're saying he's saying, wait a minute, you see a problem with a vaccine? It's just a correlation. Correlation doesn't equal causation. Okay, go home. It wasn't the vaccine. How do you know it wasn't the vaccine? If the science has never been done to show causality, if the correlation studies that are done, the retrospective studies, fall short of finding correlation, fall short of finding causation, they're incapable by themselves of testing causation. If that's the truth, then how the hell is Peter Hotez telling this committee what he's told them? I'm going to scoot to about the middle here.
What's the best the American people can hope for in terms of a quick vaccine or a soon vaccine?
Well, I think it's really important to remember that vaccines are not quick. And that has a lot to do with vaccine confidence in the United States, because, as you know, we have a very aggressive anti-vaccine movement here in this country. And
hold on. Why is vaccine confidence in the United States so low? He says it's because there's an aggressive anti-vaccine movement. Why is there an aggressive anti-vaccine movement? Because people get injured and killed by vaccines. This is simple. Okay? This is simple. It boggles the mind that they haven't made the connection that they're creating the anti-vaccine movement with flawed products that are not safe enough.
Measles came back in 2019 because of the anti-vaccine movement. Historically, when we've had measles epidemics, it peaks now, late winter, early spring, so we may be battling two epidemics. So we have to reassure the public that we don't give out vaccines unless they're thoroughly tested, and they are the most thoroughly tested pharmaceuticals we have for safety.
So yield back. I just want to thank Dr. Hotez, too, for leading.
All right, that kind of makes me sick. So they're so thoroughly tested. They're so safe, thoroughly tested. That's why we already have human trials in Seattle, Washington, with an mRNA SARS vaccine. They've already put an mRNA SARS vaccine, SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, into human beings already. That's how thoroughly tested they are. Okay, where's the animal studies? They're skipping over the animal studies. Well, I'm not skipping over anything. I'm going back to the drawing board here. I already told you that the way to shut this down is to do social distancing, optional quarantine, volunteer quarantine, work from home if you can, and treatments. We've got to bring out the antivirals. We've got to bring out any compound that will reduce the success of the virus in the human body. We have to do that. Fauci today, Anthony Fauci today said that there's no chance of a vaccine for a year and a half. Okay, so what anti-vaxxers have nothing to do with this? What is our best hope? Listen to what the man said. Listen to what this person said. I'll listen to the question, and then I'll answer the question.
Against the anti-vaxxers.
Here, let's look at this.
Who knows?
I'm going to answer the question this time.
What's the best the American people can hope for in terms of a quick vaccine?
Okay, we're going to stop right there. Okay. A quick vaccine. First of all, Congressman Your question is incomplete. The question that you should be asking is, what's the best that people can hope for in terms of a safe and effective vaccine? That's what he should have asked. Never asked that. Okay? That's the question that I would have answered. We're going to get to that in a little bit. Dead mice and ferrets, not anti-vaxxers. Can the SARS vaccine program, the SARS came out, it infected a lot of people. It had a 10% case fatality rate in the obvious cases. There are 3 studies here from 2016, 2006, and 2004. Again, I have to thank Doc Brown for highlighting these early on. He's got a great video explaining all the details of these. But the first one is immunization with inactivated Middle East respiratory syndrome coronavirus vaccine leads to lung immunopathology on challenge with the live virus. So what that means is that they took mice and they immunized them against the MERS virus with the spike protein. And then they challenged the mice with the MERS live virus, and there was unacceptably high levels of immunopathology and death. In the Deming study, vaccine efficacy in senescent mice, these are old mice, that senescent means old, challenged with recombinant SARS-CoV bearing epidemic and zoonotic spike variants. That study showed the same thing. And this was the SARS, okay, and Weingartel, 2004, immunization with modified vaccinia virus and Cara-based recombinant vaccine against SARS is associated with enhanced hepatitis in ferrets. Hepatitis, okay? So that's why the SARS program didn't go forward. But let's look at the serious and critical illness rate question now. 14 to 15% of the general population can be expected to be serious illness. The critical illness, those are people requiring ICU care, 6%. That's the number expected. And I just read today that typical, not unusual, but typical presentation is you go from no symptoms to acute symptoms like within an hour. So, but again, let's talk about the math here. The serious and critical illness rate, this does not mean that 14 to 15% of the entire population, I say general population there for a reason, I'll get to that in a minute, but it doesn't mean that 14 to 15% of the entire population is going to be critically ill. That would require 100% infection. What this means is of the people that we know that have coronavirus or COVID-19, 14 to 15% of those are going to be seriously ill. They're going to need a hospital bed. 6% are going to require an ICU. Now, there's an MD out there who'd like to think that he's famous, who claims and he harps on the fact that 14 to 15% serious illness rate among medical professionals is unusual, and he hypothesized, speculated, I should say, in his first interview with Peter Hotez, that 14 to 15% might be there because these medical doctors are on the front line and they're getting a large dose. And then the next time I saw him do a video, that became fact in his mind because he's repeating it. They get a large dose when they intubate, he speculated. And this is absolutely ridiculous. It's far more likely that the reason why 14 to 15% of medical doctors get a serious illness is because 14 to 15% of anyone who gets SARS-CoV-2 gets a serious illness. There's nothing special about medical doctors that just because they're medical doctors, they have a high rate. He's making it seem like they have an especially high rate of serious illness, and they don't. Okay? The public deserves to know that. So let's look at the possible responses at this point in time. We could still try to contain and delay. We absolutely need to try to move from an exponential situation to a linear because we only have like 970,000 hospital beds in the United States. We're going to get to millions of cases, all right? And we're going to have sick medical staff, and we're going to have quarantined medical staff by the dozens, and then by the hundreds, and then by the thousands if we don't do something here. In terms of mass quarantine, which is the only reason why China got this under control, Fauci said today on Meet the Press, this is something we'd never be able to do here in the United States. So they don't, in other words, they don't have a plan. They don't have a vaccine. They're not going to do strict social isolation, according to them. And they certainly are not emphasizing treatments with antivirals. Okay? So this is worse than nothing, because look at what happens when you make an announcement. Please, public health officials, send this video to your public health officials. When you make an announcement that you have a case of coronavirus, SARS coronavirus 2 in your county or in your city or in your state, please don't bring everybody from the Department of Health to the press conference. This is not social isolation. These are random samples just from the past week. Okay, this is ridiculous. You also should advise the press that you will have your own camera and that you'll take questions remotely. You're setting a bad example for the rest of the country. This is such a dire threat, and that all these people are standing within feet of each other, breathing on each other. Okay, at least we're not seeing people shaking hands like we saw at the press conference with the president and the CDC members shaking hands in public. Okay, but this is ridiculous. So if they're living it and they're breathing it, there's not going to be any mass quarantine. At least you can do is not have these arbitrary gatherings of people that if one person's infected, they just infected 2 people, 4 people, 5 people in the room. You know, they're not even thinking. Surgeon General Jerome Adams is my hero, should be your hero too, because what he says, March 4th, just 4 days ago, what I want Americans to know is that when we look back at past infectious disease outbreaks like this, they weren't ended with therapeutics or with vaccines. They ended with hand washing. They were ended with social distancing. They were ended with the basic public health and hygiene measures that keep us safe from the flu and everyday cold, and will also keep us safe from coronaviruses. Okay, I doubt that he's right about this time. I really seriously doubt that he's right this time. We need therapeutics. We need them badly. We need social distancing. We need it badly. Okay, that's my position on it. Now, when it comes to the vaccine, what I've done, the IPAC research that I'm going to tell you about right now is some serious research. I'm going to break it down as simple as I can for you. There are some, depending on who you ask, there's something like 37, I think, proteins in SARS coronavirus 2. Excuse me. And I'll try to break this down for you. What I've done is I took each and every protein in the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and I found the immunogenetic epitopes within the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus. Okay, I found the parts of the coronavirus that are most likely to induce an immune reaction in humans. This is a computational method that I used. There were 37 identified proteins in the SARS-CoV-2 database at the National Center for Biotechnology and Information. I then took those highly immunogenic epitopes and I compared them to all human proteins, one by one. So for all the immunogenic epitopes that I found, I made comparisons to all human proteins using a program called BLAST. And this list of human proteins that matched, they have high homology. This is the molecular mimicry that you know about. The molecular mimicry, all of the proteins that had immunogenic peptides, some of them didn't. Eight of the proteins, 8 out of 37, had no recognizably immunogenic peptides sequences. The remaining proteins had between 1 and 6 immunogenic peptides. The spike protein had the largest number, and then the non-structural protein 3 they both had 6 immunogenic proteins. And all of the proteins that had immunogenic epitopes had matches to human proteins, except for one. There's a nucleocapsid phosphoprotein. That's the only protein that I would consider by itself for a vaccine. Out of all the 37 proteins that are there, I certainly wouldn't go to the most highly immunogenic that has the most matches between humans and the virus. But the nucleocapsid phosphoprotein also has another epitope that does have a match to the part of the immune system called the immunoglobulin heavy chain junction region protein. So something really, really concerning came out of this comparison. The thing that came out of this comparison was that about a third, 11 out of the 27 immunogenic proteins, had a match to proteins that are really, really important for the human adaptive immune system. And I'm sorry I don't have figures and fancy charts that just have this table on here. But these are important things like the MHC class 1 and class 2 antigen presentation, PD-1 signaling, and cross-presentation of soluble exogenous antigens, and the ER phagosome pathway. So we're looking at a virus that is like a virus from hell. This tells us also that this virus, if it primes the people to be more susceptible to serious illness, it's probably because you've developed autoimmunity against your own immune system components. Now, I also took the time to look at the types of tissues that are impacted if you have autoimmunity. If you have autoimmunity induced by, and this is an if, not when you get autoimmunity, but if you develop autoimmunity against these proteins, we're looking at some peptides that are expressed in all human tissues. And we're looking at some that are in the brain and the lung, of course, and the kidney, and some in the eye. And so gastrointestinal tract, okay, so in the spleen, skeletal muscle, so adipose tissue and muscle, placenta, the liver, okay, thyroid gland, all right? And in the paper that I wrote, and I sent it to Peter Hotez, and I sent it to Paul Offit, and I sent it to Secretary Azar, the HHS, and a bunch of friends I sent it to. I made a prediction. The prediction that I made based on the analysis is that we could see meningitis because of the brain proteins that would be affected. Now we see from Japan that today, this is a brand new headline, new to me anyway, that the infection may have caused meningitis. All right. People that get this infection twice have a higher risk, I believe, through molecular mimicry and induction of autoimmunity. Viral induction of autoimmunity is very well established. Virus induction of autoimmunity through exposure of virus from a vaccine is also very well established. And we can point to the narcolepsy case from the H1N1 flu vaccine in Europe. So I hope people understand that a lot of people have written to me saying, why are you so upset about this? You're falling for the hype. What are you doing? One person wrote to me and said, people think that you've lost your mind. Okay, people think that you're going crazy. And, I'm 100% transparent on where I'm coming from. I hope people realize that. I saw this way, way, way back. I want to go up here to my blog article. I was concerned about this when I wrote this article, and this article is getting a little old. Okay, I did the simulations February 24th. How bad can it get? So that's not that long ago, but you can go read this. There are things you don't yet know about, but need to know about the novel coronavirus, including treatment information and how to prepare your home. Why would I include treatment information? Well, therapeutics are very important. The simulations that I conducted showed that this thing was going to do this. Well, guess what we see, folks? And what I showed was that the sooner that you start doing social distancing, and then you can slow that down. But it still does this. That's what the simulations show with the numbers from this virus. I mean, the basic reproductive number and so on. And But if you then combine treatments, it'll go on for a couple of weeks, and then you can start see a nosedive. So it's really, really important that we take this seriously in terms of social distancing. And I predict here and now that there will be an announcement of mass quarantine in Washington State. I haven't heard anything. This is not from any information that I've read. Don't have any inside information, and I haven't spoken with anybody from Washington State or in Washington D.C. for that matter about this issue. I'm making the prediction raw right now that it's going to overwhelm the medical community in Washington first, and then in New York, and then in California, and we could be seeing mass quarantine. So, to my friends, prepare. Stock dry goods. Okay, food that you will eat. Get some canned soup. Get some nuts, trail mix, energy bars, things that you know that will nourish you. In case you are quarantined for 2 weeks, you have to show that you have no symptoms for 2 weeks before they'll let you out if you're quarantined. They might let you go shopping, one person from your family. This is how China did it. They might let you go shopping once or twice a week. But you need to take this seriously to be prepared. And to the people who have prepared, start telling people that you've prepared so people know that, oh, well, I respect that person's opinion. That's how this has to happen. It has to happen organically because the government's not going to do it. The government's going to see that this thing takes off, it affects millions of people. Millions of people are going to need beds, but we only have 900,000 beds in a hospital. So the last thing that I want to point out is, don't be selfish about it from the perspective of, well, I'm not part of the at-risk population. Because the elderly, do you have an elderly favorite aunt or an elderly favorite teacher from years ago? How about a grandmother or grandfather or your parents? These are real concerns. And also, what happens when all the hospital beds in the ICUs fill up with coronavirus victims, where there's no beds for anybody else? So we're going to see this antecedent, we're going to see this consequence of higher mortality from all causes unless we socially isolate now. So I would like to encourage everybody to cancel non-essential social gatherings. I would like to encourage people to start talking about their schools about getting ready now for distance learning. And that means parents are going to have to stay home. So start talking at work about shifts, that makes sense. People with kids should maybe work at night or something. Okay. And this is going to be a huge strain. But our country, our government put the economy first. Fauci said it today that they're not going to do mass quarantine. So I doubt it, though. I think that the state governors are going to use their emergency declarations to do quarantine. Don't be afraid of a quarantine, but also don't break that quarantine if it becomes official. Because what will happen if you break quarantine if it becomes official is they can put you in a quarantine center. So enjoy the comfort of your home while you can, if you are in a state, city, county, however they do it, to try to get this thing to slow down. They're not going to try to stop it. They're going to try to slow it down so that rate, I'll bring that curve back up again, so that rate can go linear instead. We want to be like Hong Kong. Where did it go? I guess I have it here. I think. Is this it? No, that's not it. We want to slow things down. That's all. The best that we can do is slow it down, and it's up to all of us to slow it down. Yeah, here it is. Sorry about that. I want to make our rates more comparable to Hong Kong. See if I can find it. It is right here. There. We're part of this group of countries. We want to be like this. Go look up what they're doing in Singapore, what they're doing in Hong Kong, and then insist that's something that we need to move towards. Insist on therapeutics. All of the money, in my opinion, all 100%, and I told this to Peter Hotez and to Paul Offit, all of the money should be going to the production and distribution of treatments and getting the public ready for social isolation. So I hope this helps people understand at least where I'm coming from. If you want to know what kinds of treatments are available and what to ask for, go to this page. I haven't updated it in a while, but chloroquine phosphate, it's an anti-malarial drug. They're here. There's a bunch that are listed here. People are talking about high-dose vitamin C, of course, and there's information there for you to look into. But I'll be with you every step of the way. They're not going to use this to abuse and beat up the anti-vaxxers. As I said, I think the very first tweet that I made about this was that this outbreak has nothing to do with vaccines. Nothing. Zero. So it has nothing to do with vaccine risk awareness. Zero. Nothing to do with it. We have to use the tools. They should do contact tracing if there's, new cases in a town for a while to try to slow it down. But basically, we need to reduce the number of people that go out in the public. Do your grocery shopping at 3 a.m. Cancel that gathering. Do things by distance if you can. Ask your priest, your imam, or your spiritual leaders, rabbis, and so on, to host celebrations and to host religious worship events by distance, like distance education. We all have the internet. We all have computers. We all have cell phones. It's for a time period. I'm not talking about a permanent cultural change. So we have to help slow this down, even if we're not in the target zone. And those of you they're very, very smart. A lot of my friends and followers are very, very smart. And they're going to say, Jack, don't you understand that you're making a case for a vaccine? It's for the greater good. So I'm not making a case for a vaccine because unless Peter Hotez and Paul Offit and Azar and other people that I've sent this manuscript to actually reformulate their vaccines, the vaccine that they come out with the spike protein, that mRNA vaccine that's being tested right now, those people might be able to be better off, fight off their first infection. But it's highly unlikely that they're going to do well if they get a second infection, if a second challenge with a coronavirus, where the spike protein is just a little different because of a process called original antigenic sin. So that is Unbreaking Science today, 3/8/2020. I want to thank you all for being part of it, and I wish you all the very best of health, and be excellent to each other. I'm out. Thank you.